that you're here also. I'm rather excited about this because I know this young lady. I've known her for quite a few years. She is like one of the first persons that called me out when I came to the Sioux. And we were at a powwow meeting. Teresa DeLorme put a little article in the evening news, and it said, anybody interested in joining the powwow committee, we're having a meeting at the Mary Murray building, and to show up at 1 o'clock. And well, I had just moved up here from Grand Rapids. I had worked for 10 years with the Grand Rapids schools in their Indian Education Title IV program. And when I moved up here, I also had run the PA system for the Three Fires powwow for a number of years. So I thought, well, that's probably right where I should hop in now that I'm up here. And so I saw that little article which Teresa put in the paper, and people told her nobody's going to pay attention to that little article. But I saw it, so I showed up, and there were tables sitting in the room there. And I got there early. I sat with my back to the windows because I wanted the light behind me. I was kind of like a gunfighter. I wanted to, I watch a lot of westerns, so I had the windows behind me. But anyway, the meeting started and everybody was talking. And of course me, I'm adding my 2 cents worth and talking with everybody. And all of a sudden, this woman says, wait a minute, who are you? And I said, oh. So I said, I introduced myself. I said, I'm George Snyder. I just moved up here from Grand Rapids. And so Cathy really is one of the first people I met. She called me out and wanted to know just who the heck I was. So.
Well, you have a better memory than I do, because I don't remember doing that.
Well, that's how you are. And when I told other people that story, they said, yeah, that's Cathy. She would call you out, I don't know who you are. So I'm real pleased to introduce Cathy DeVoy here, and my old friend, and I so admire this woman because I know she has been around here not too long as somebody else. No, not too long, but she's been around and she has a great family history. She has a wonderful family she comes from, and being Sugar Island roots, I certainly feel my Sugar Island shirt on. I certainly feel related to anybody from Sugar Island, and of course anybody from Sault Tribe. I feel that relationship too. So welcome my family, okay? You're all my family. And please make welcome Cathy DeVoy.
Well, he got to stay because I found out his mom and my mom were best friends growing up on Sugar Island. So, yeah, but it was all right. So, Ani Bozo, Archival de Bahweting under Bahweting Apogee Gene when this morning. It was supposed to rain, huh?
A little bit.
Just a little bit. The only thing dry on me was the top of my head because I had an umbrella. Everything else was sick. So I had to go and change. New Glucks for coming today, and my co-worker here, Marie Richards, is going to do this presentation with me. I'm going to do a little bit of the first half, and Marie's going to do the second half. And I think you'll see why we're dividing it up here in a little bit. Because my portion has a little bit of audience participation. Everybody's like, oh God, I should have left. Anyways, one of the things that I grew up with a lot of older people around me because I was the last child and my mom was almost 40 when I was born, and she was the oldest daughter, and it kind of fell to her and the family to go and check on the old folks. So every weekend we were down on the island visiting this one and that one. Many of faces, but I don't know who they were. But it was always Aunt this and Uncle that, and and unlike some of my cousins who got to go out and play, my mom made me stay full star, and I'm thankful today for that. Although I thought it was just horrible back then, because I heard a lot of things, so I was really blessed like that. And I spent a lot of time with my great aunt, who really was the grandmother in my life. She was my grandfather's sister, because all my grandmothers died before I was born. And she was an amazing storyteller. And she could talk to you about people that lived 100 years before her, and look at the sitting right next to her. She was like that. So I think a little bit I inherited some of her storytelling ability. Mary Murray was her name, and some of you may know that from the camp and other things. So anyway, I'm going to do the oral history portion of this lesson. This isn't just about treaty stuff. This is about going way back. So I'm going to have to put the mic down in a minute. So I need maybe on the perimeter about 10 people to volunteer here. Raise your hand. You just got to stand up and hold something. That's all. You don't got to get to the mic or anything. Come on, you two. Just go stand back there a little bit. Or no, you two come up here. Just kind of spread out about around the perimeter of this tent. Yeah, I think so. In this former bag, I hold 20,000 years of tribal life on this continent. So, start with you. Maybe I went a little bit too far with too much. Not yet. Okay. Yeah, just keep going as they are. Unfortunately, same for you. Get that loosened up, pass it on down. It's not too George. Probably weren't expecting participant. Audience participation there, though. Do we need more volunteers? Yeah. Do we need a few more people, Cathy?
stay here. Hold that up. Yeah. On the other end. All right. That's good. It's tight. You see? Hold on. I guess I gotta do that. I can hear the cameras on. I'm gonna skip that for you too.
You want one more person to hold the end? Or I can hold the end.
Okay. Let's see. You see all this rope here?
What this represents is 20,000 years of our existence here on this land. And I do this for the visual effect because, you know, it doesn't sound like very much, but when you see it, it's a different matter. And I'm going to say, this much is the tribal history that we know about since the colonization started.
Just look around and see how long we have been.
And we have known through our stories, through our oral history, going way, way back. We have creation stories of how human beings were created, how we were lowered to the earth. We have stories of the first man and the first woman. And they go way back to the beginning. Who's got the beginning over there? Right in there is where we started. And as we went along, what that represents there is probably the end of the Ice Age, if we have to put it in historical context. And then as we go along, we are migrating across the Americas, through the Great Lakes, all of our people, which weren't a huge number like we think of today, but they were small groups, small bands, and they didn't know they were Ojibwe or that they were Anishinaabe. They were just people from the earth, you know, the ones that the Creator had put here. And as time went along, like maybe when it got to over this fella here, thousands of years, we have stories that talk about that time. Any of you ever heard the story of Mindaman, Porn, and Nanabujo? Those are, you know, everybody looks at a lot of our stories, oh, those are just nice little children's stories. They're not. They are our history. Those stories, those oral stories, contain our history. But they're told in story form. That's how we remembered things. You know, we didn't have laptops and cell phones and that. But our ancestors found a way to do that, to remember and pass on to the next generation some of these stories. And I can't really talk about those stories right now because this is the middle of summer and that's not the time for storytelling. Stories were saved for winter, for spiritual reasons, but also some practical reasons. That was a time when families were together in a lodge, and that's how it was passed on. So doing this little rope thing kind of just gives you a little visual effect of what it actually looks like. This is the history we know that was written down by John or Chinookman. People have different terms for the colonizers, but not much compared to how long we have actually been here. You know, and during that time, we learned all kinds of things. We discovered maple syrup. There's a story about that. There's so many stories. The story of Nanabujo and Mandama was us learning about agriculture. When we first began to turn from a hunting society to a society that could plant and grow things. And we learned that from our southern ancestors. And that's how it goes. There's stories like that all throughout our history. And some guy named Longfellow thought it would be cute to take take our stories from the life of Schoolcraft and turn them into an epic poem they call it Hiawatha. That wasn't named Mr. Hiawatha. His name was Leonard Butcher. And he misappropriated those stories. So, but at least we know them. So, I'm going to put the rope down here. You folks can, you want to rope this in, Marie?
Oh, yeah. I can look at it when you talk.
I just think as a Anishinaabe people, we remember visually better than we do this way all the time. And sometimes the two of them together. So that was my little demonstration. People are usually really surprised when they really see that. Exactly just how long our history has been. So, the guy at the store thought, wow, you're going to hang up a lot of clothes there. I asked Marie to find these maps for me because I wanted you to see something. How many of you have heard theories about, oh, we came across the Bering Straits and all of that? But that's the origin of our people. Might be the origin of some of our people, but not all of them. If you look, you see it says the Laurentian ice sheet. That was the last ice age that covered the Great Lakes, or covered what would be the Great Lakes. And at that time, I mean, Anishinaabe people, no matter what their tribe turned out to be, were migrating all the time. You had to follow the game, which was, sometimes it was mastodons, and even in the Southwest, I watched the NPR program where they were talking about woolly mammoths and all of that. And they had to go where they could find food. So many people were migrating all across the country, back and forth, and our ancestors did too. As that ice sheet melted and formed the Great Lakes, that's when our ancestors first moved in there. Okay? So probably by 14,000 years ago, and then 9,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, and then 4,000 years ago, we were fully living in the Great Lakes area. And it isn't just, okay, we stopped and settled and stayed there. Many of our people moved all across the United States to the East Coast. People today that are Micmac, Wabanot, Penobscot, and there's many of their tribes that were destroyed. We don't even know their names. Those are our Eastern relatives. They speak a similar language as we do. And that brings us to, just 7,000 years ago maybe. They continued moving on to the East Coast. All along there, just all kinds of villages and names and tribes. I've been out there. I've visited the Wampanoag people, and it was incredible. The first thing they did is they asked me how I was in Ojibwe or in Anishinaabe, and it was like it shocked me that they did, and it was like, oh my God, those stories are correct. These are our people. Then they tried to get me in a skinny little nugget canoe, and it was like, yeah, because they take their dugouts into the ocean. I don't even go on one in the lakes, let alone the ocean, but it was like, I don't think so. So they have a lot of the same ways as ours. So, history, when you look back about 1,000 years ago, this is when the first colonizing started. Did you guys ever hear of these Vikings? Leif Erikson, all of that, They were adventurers that came across the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean. And they first landed around Greenland. And eventually they made their way down the coast. And nobody really knows how far down they made. And they have found some evidence, but not very much evidence of settlement. Because for some reason they didn't stay long. And, maybe we weren't tonight. Maybe our really old ancestors weren't as nice as we are. Not sure, but all we know is that there was no settlements, permanent settlements there. However, they did leave us with a gift, a very bad one, disease. And looking back, if any of you are familiar with the stories of the 7 prophecies, anybody? No? The 7 prophecies? There were prophecies given to the people, especially the Mishnah that lived along the coast. There were prophecies about what was to come. And the last prophecy was, not the last prophecy, no, it was like the 5th or 6th prophecy, was that if they did not leave their home where they'd lived for hundreds and hundreds of years along the East Coast, and migrate west, that they would be wiped out. Well, some, like any people, there are probably some were skeptical, and some were like, yeah, we're going to get the heck out of here. And unfortunately, the ones that stayed behind did suffer, because the thing that those Norsemen left behind was disease. That was our first exposure to European disease. And by the time the English and the Dutch and the French and they all got here, our populations along the East Coast, our Anishinaabe people, had been wiped out, sometimes just wiped out, period. Because if you go back and you read the history, you see where a lot of, the voyagers and the English, they would come onto the land and they would find villages that were just empty. And dead bodies or skeletons everywhere. There was nobody left to even bury them. So I think that our ancestors, prophets, or what, knew that this was coming once this first wave of Norsemen came. So that was 1,000 years ago. Over 1,000 actually now. I forget when the next century. And also during that time, there was a group of Anishinaabe people that decided that they would listen to the prophets, the prophecies of our spiritual people, and they would move. And thus began a migration down the St. Lawrence Seaway. You can see it there, part of it anyway, the St. Lawrence Seaway, all the way through Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, up the coast in Lake Huron, up to where we are now, Bahweting. And those prophecies talked about different stopping places where our people would stay and settle and create, communities and so forth. And we would know when that migration was over, they call it the migration story, when our people would find food that would grow on water. And by the time they reached the end of Lake Superior, they found food growing on water. Anybody know what that is? It's a lot of years. It's a lot of years. But that was where our migration was done. And that migration took many hundreds of years, because a large group of people just don't pack up and leave. And there were stopping places along the way. And they say that Bahweting, this is why this place is sacred, was the 5th stopping place. It's the middle, and they say it's the center of the Anishinaabe world. And it was also, Bahweting here was a place that the people could come back to from all directions whenever they needed to have gatherings, spiritual gatherings, meetings, I guess we call them political meetings today, the Three Fires, were all gathered here. The Three Fires came about as this migration came through. As the Potawatomi, the Odawa, the Ojibwe, we became not separate groups, but groups that had each a responsibility to the larger group of Anishinaabe people. And we still do. We still believe in that today. So a lot of these things were done here at Bahweting because the other thing is, before the, the locks, has anybody been to the locks? Our villages were spread all around along the shores of the St. Mary's River because it was just thick with whitefish until they kicked us off, until they removed us. So that is why we call it the homecoming. Bahweting is a place of the rapids, and some people say the actual interpretation of that is that it's like the mist that comes off the rapids as they used to go through. Now there's a little, 5-acre patch of rapids, and it's not very much anymore. You go across the bridge to the Canadian side to even see it. So, and the rapids were there because Lake Superior is higher than the other lakes, going down to the other lakes. So, I don't know if that is a half. You're just going to let me talk, aren't you? So, yeah, a lot of stories there, lots and lots of stories. And maybe we can do this again come wintertime, when we can. Not all stories are wintertime stories, but many of them that especially talk about our ancient history are wintertime stories. Oh, but one point I forgot to make too is, as the Anishinaabe migrated this way, it's not like they were taking over or pushing out anybody, because the ones that had stayed in the Great Lakes during that last Ice Age migration when they came through, those are our relatives. They just didn't choose to go all the way to the East Coast. So really, if you look at a map of the United States, all along the East Coast, those are all people from the same language group as we are. And that should tell you something, that they are our relatives too. That somehow, sometime in the ancient mists of time, we all migrated from one language group into the entire East Coast. So that's what they say, most of the tribes that are east of the Mississippi are our relatives. Whether that be Choctaw, Chickasaw, Miami, many more. So, it's just my kids telling me about it. So, I'm going to let Marie talk a little bit here, because now I'm coming back into modern history, and that's her forte. You get the last 500 years.
I get that whole arm span that has Honey. Honey. Oh, I got a new one just telling me. Honey. Did you go to 6th grade revision class? It's from the Michigan Donzaba. Minik Dora. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Marie Richards. I'm our repatriation and historic preservation specialist. Work in the cultural department, bringing home those ancestors via America, protecting our sites, and there's different activities going on, especially when the feds are doing it, because they've destroyed enough of everything for us. But I'm also a PhD candidate in industrial heritage and archaeology at Michigan Tech. So a lot of what I do is in this era. So I'm an archaeologist, historical archaeologist, but I use the title ethnohistorian more often because it's our cultural history, right? It goes into that, and that's just the title that my profession gives it. So that's what I do, and I specifically look at the 1800s and our survival, how we thrived in that time, in which we know that was a difficult time. But a lot of what I have to do is work with other people to help them understand that history that Cathy just gave, that understanding our past before they came in with written records, and we have our own written records, right? We have the birch scrolls, all these things that non-Anishinaabe people didn't recognize as what we were doing. So it's very important to know all those stories because our time is not linear. You know, we have that creation story, and that's timeless. There isn't a date to that time. So we're existing within this, and our stories are always ongoing within these time frames. But in the historical record, we have like these punctuated things where they make notes of what we're doing, right? Their observations of what we're doing, and it's only glimpses. You have like the 1641, the Jesuits are here, and they're in St. Ignace, and they're doing their thing as missionaries, and they're recording things that we're doing at that time. And that's like a snapshot according to them of what's going on. But that's where knowing our traditions today and knowing these oral histories and oral traditions, we know what's going on outside of that. And they'll write things of, oh, there's only 100 people in this village here, so they might know, you know, they're here in winter, and everybody's scattered through the interior of the Upper Peninsula, right? Because we're on the shoreline in the summers, and we're going all sorts of places in the winter, just because that's how we do it. We do these seasonal rounds. And so those are still going on as Europeans come in, and as they spread that disease and force their values on us in ways, you know, and it's not a single event. It takes a long time. There's these interactions. We're losing knowledge keepers at that time and passing things, but we're retaining them too. That's why it's a story of survivance and thriving in that time. But there's these little punctuated historical things, and that's where when our knowledge keepers have the stories of that time, it's so important that we listen and we have those opportunities to hear it, because that's how we know what we were doing at that time and everything. So we're still doing things, we're harvesting our food, we're still shaping this place, we're still doing that, and we're interacting with the French traders. You know, we're here, they're in St. Ignace. Eventually they establish a fort in Detroit, and I'm an archaeologist, I don't deal with dates. So, and plus sometimes, but, you know, so from like the 1600s onwards, there's more and more interest from outside of coming in here. And what's going on here, and there's wealth in the fur, and there's wealth in this, and there's wealth in that. And that's the key, right? They're thinking wealth. And we're valuing it differently. We value the copper differently. We value the gnomon. We value the sugar that we get in the spring. But they're seeing it differently, and they're coming in. And then, you know, the trade-offs. You know, we're all forced to learn American history. Right? We don't get to learn Anishinaabe history in our schools. Well, that's changing, right? That's changing. But this is all going on, and then we have the treaties. And so this is kind of where I'm way more familiar with is after 1836 when we signed that treaty, right? And there's other people who can go into way more details, and we get to hear those stories. That's important. But you know, they start to change the rules on us. But we have this history of negotiating with our neighbors. You know, that's part of the thing with the three fires that Cathy mentioned, right? We're working with our Dawo, working with our Potawatomi brother. The Menominee are living near us, and we're doing things. So we already have it established how to coexist with other nations. And then the American period, and that dynamic changes. And so, but what I'm trying to understand, and what we know happened, is that we still did our own thing, even though they told us to do other things, right? We're still teaching. We're still speaking the language. We're still harvesting what we can. We're just taking away the land from where we can do it. Like that's what I'm trying to understand for our community through my doctoral work is how we still stay niche, how we still stay Anishinaabe in this changing cultural landscape. And we are, and we're thriving at doing it, obviously, because we're all here. And what am I doing on time? I can go on forever. But you know, that is a critical period, because then that's, you know, that pivotal change in that power dynamic that's going on, and you start to have, you know, the Indians need to go and be educated. So you have the increase in the missionary schools going on at this time. And you have the Indian agencies doing different things and different fraudulent things with their accounting going on. They're all doing this. And it's all over, but we're still doing nothing. We're still doing nothing. We're still telling the stories, just maybe in secret. They're not out there. But people are also studying, trying to understand us. But it's always through their understanding. But we're still out there doing that. What else was I apologize. But yeah, so we have the boarding school experience, which we all know about, and that's not my area of expertise. But
Maria's an archaeologist, and one of the things that she is very involved with is this whole Enbridge thing. And I was hoping you'd tell that story about the corridor between the states.
oh, I absolutely can. Can you go back there? And this is where it's important for us knowing these stories, right? And why I'm stressing that we're still telling each other how to be Native, how to be Anishinaabe, Ojibwa, and everything. And that's the important thing is that we've always been. As long as we've been here, that's how we've been. They tried to use the migration story against the Sitlans, but we were here. And can you go to that 7,000 years ago? So this is where knowing the stories and tradition is important. Is you see, if it's green, it's land. If it's blue, it's water. We have this waterless area that we now know as the Straits. And there's a river that runs through it. And that river still runs through it. It's at the very bottom of the Straits. It's a sunken river. Is one way, but it would go through and it goes over around what we now know as Mackinac Island, which would have been a really big hill. So you have this area, we have these really big bluffs on both sides. That, you can see in this map, is full of water. So we kind of have the reverse of what went on with the Straits. The water drained out of here, it filled the Straits. But we have sites. We love living along water, so wherever those shorelines were, is where we are. Being niche, right? Being native. And that's where we're at. And so we have so much of that unknown history that's controlled by other people and their understanding. And it's important that we share the stories about who we were, who we are, who we understand that we were, in through that area. And because it looks very different. And it's really hard when there's the state lines in, to kind of picture it. But just imagine all of our village sites, if you're trying to imagine a village site stretch all along the Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula now, they're doing that there too. But we have sites, I think some of you would have seen the Detroit Press piece about when, was it Green Traverse? A couple of folks had gone in with a G-Log and did some sonar at the bottom. We have that, and we can tell them who live there. But that's where, that coming back story that Cathy talked about, why that's important.
We were there before, or as the ice was receding. So that's how, there was no water there. So tell them about that, they found evidence that human beings had built this, I don't know what you call it, where they herded the big animals in.
Yes. Yeah, so there's one archaeologist. I'm going to hop up on the stage because I prefer Max. Okay. Alright, what was I going to point out? Right, so we're right here, right, we're talking about Straits. There's this bridge, you can kind of see, so these are fluctuating, because there's 3,000 years between this, there's, I don't remember how many thousand years before that. Right, so these waters are constantly fluctuating, there's this ridge down in here. And so there is an archaeologist and a couple of them who do underwater archaeology in the Great Lakes. We need more, especially if anybody, Anishinaabe wants to get into that realm. But they have, it's called like a caribou site. So one of the ways that we would go through and hunt animals back in that day, and some folks maybe still do that, you kind of corral the animals into a space that you can control. So they built basically lines out of stone, and we're pretty sure that if you were to drain the lakes, you would see a lot of these things. We don't really see it in here, because we alter the landscape. We want to clear those rocks out if you're farming, right? So boom, out goes those rocks. So we don't see it in the land, but we see it in the water. So what those basically do is they're arguing that it's basically a channel of you get these animals in and they're kind of stuck. We see this out west too, they did it with buffalo. It makes it easier to, it's hard to get animals when they're in the move. Anybody who's hunted knows that. It's hard to get the animals when they're on the move. So you kind of put them in this little space to get them. But then, if it's there, it's here. It's there. It's all this thing. That's where it's important to recognize that there's no water in there. There's just that big giant river going through it. So if that's there, there's probably other sites too, right? So that's a big question, but it's really hard to do underwater archaeology. I don't like going underwater. I refuse to be a scuba diver, so I can never be an underwater archaeologist. But that's what's going on. So then that question that we have was something like, Enrich, we have sites there. They're buried. Once the water filled in, you couldn't keep living there, so we just moved back. But if we have a village here, and we have a village here, and we have villages lined up, we would have had villages further in. And also there's the fact that we don't leave a big footprint in our sites in those days, We don't dig giant holes in the ground. There's the rules about how far you can dig in and everything. So our footprint is really small, even historically. Like me trying to understand native homesteads is kind of hard because the footprint is small. But they're there. They're just incredibly hard to study. And everything. But we're there because that space is sacred, and its own innate nature. We want to live there. We wanted to live there. We wanted to live there. Once the ice was on, let's here. This is a really cool place. So that's what we did. But then that's another example of people kind of trying to control our story and our understanding, because they'll say, that's somebody else. And you guys came in later with that migration story. But they knew what we were coming home to when folks migrated back here and married in their families. So that's kind of what's going on with us trying to understand our place here in the Great Lakes, is that the Great Lakes changed just like us. And we changed with the lakes and back and forth and everything. But we do it because we know how to be an Anishinaabe and we know how to live here. So whether it was 7,000 years ago or 50 years when we worked on getting our recognition, we knew how to be Anishinaabe. We know how to be Anishinaabe today. And we have to tell other people we know who we are and we know how we live. And that's probably the hardest part about being the repatriation specialist, is having to argue with folks who are like, what do you mean you got it wrong? You guys they didn't want to listen when we tried telling them. So, what else do you want me to tell folks about Cathy? Okay. We only have 3 minutes? Okay, I don't have anything else unless I have another hour, but I guess I can we're not doing questions. Because I can talk about my dissertation for 3 minutes.
Okay, I just want to point out one thing that Marie said. She's talking about, government and sometimes archaeologists, universities, and trying to say, you just migrated back here about 600 or 700 years ago. Just keep in mind that migration from the East Coast was one of our groups of people, and it was the last migration, not the only one. Our people have been here for probably 20,000 years at least. Yeah. We should start running after something. Okay.
planet to the Bering Strait. Hey, Larry, can you zoom out? Right, so they like to take that story because for Lenape, that is like a migration story they like to talk about the same way we talk about the Medewan coming back. But like all the archaeologists love this corridor for whatever reason. But you can see down this way and around. But when they started hearing like the Lenape story in Delaware, the Mi'kmaq story, anybody's story that talks about their migration east, they all apply to the Bering Strait. And not the fact that, hey, there's ice here. They're traveling across ice, and there's still ice in the Great Lakes. So, that's important to know those east migration stories to the east, to our relatives, the Mi'kmaq and the Wabanaki and everything.
Okay. Have you ever looked at the art of the West Coast, the Salish, the Yakima, all of them? Have you ever looked at the art of the people from the Micronesian Islands? Pretty much the same, isn't it? Kind of makes you go, people, we were all boat people. Why, who's to say that some of our most ancient ancestors didn't come from the south or the southeast and come west? Yeah, sure, there's some evidence in our DNA that says, we have ancestors that came through that ice corridor, but, one of the things that we were most well known for was travel by boat. Even, especially in the Great Lakes, but even our ancestors knew how to row a boat. So it's always like, these are answers to things we'll never have, but makes you go, sometimes thinking about when we start comparing language and art, and we're getting a signal, so we gotta wrap this up. So much for listening, and maybe we'll get together this winter and really tell some stories. Now,
Hey, that's everyone.